We will now examine a third game in this French when h4 is played and also pawn not protected. By the way, I think that these particular games are also interesting for the people who play this variation, either with white and black. I love very much how Fischer played it. But next thing is also interesting. This is a game play between Jordan van Foreest and van der Lende. Okay, game is the second player is not known. But Jordan did analyze his position a lot. I analyzed it with him as well. And the game has some important moments, interesting moments. And also we will come across a game of Caruana played versus Lenderman, US Championship 2018 through it. So here h4. What is the best reaction for black? Not easy, but probably b6 actually is not a bad reaction. Lenderman versus Caruana did not react well, that's for sure. He played move knight c6 because he will suffer annihilation. Push h6. Well, he cannot really take because this looks really bad. I mean, such a type of stuff. This looks really wrong. And check will happen, and no, this simply looks wrong. So h6, queen d1. Now back almost like Fischer. He gets pawn on h5 and queen is back. And now, for a love of one pawn, black has completely neglected the development, and this will really go wrong. He pushes g5 with idea to take it with queen. But now, look, this king is really into problems. And Caruana will game in easily. Bishop d3, strong move. King e2. Rooks are connected, queen almost lost. Position is basically lost. He wants to escape with he wants this, for example. And then to hope somehow by some miracle to escape. Which I doubt it can, because it looks also lost. But he doesn't get his chance. Rook h4. Rook g1. Threatening to win a piece. Bishop b4. Well, look how terrible pins. In this game, Lenderman's king on e8 is really horrible king. a5, takes, and he designed horrible annihilation. So, move like knight c6 is wrong for sure. Queen c2 can be tried. This move is always possible, and I don't think it's stupid, but h5 looks to me like serious compensation for white. Many moves here, for example, this looks to me like compensation. Because king is somehow still weak. Knight c6, perhaps possible to take, to enter this position, but also rook e3 does not really look wrong. And now to take. Same number of pawns and initiative. I doubt that black can risk something like this. Because this rook is now extremely stupid, so this would be really wrong. It would take ages for this piece to get out. So I think that for theoretical perspective of this line, if white is not willing to repeat Fischer with queen d1, which looks to me like advantage for white, I do not see particular reason not to repeat our first game Fischer hook, then h4 is certainly an interesting option. b6 happened in this game, h5, queen c2, knight e2 first, h6. I think that move like h6 he didn't want to consider because of takes, and this is hanging. So you cannot take by bishop because pawn hangs, and I guess that Jordan was not in the mood to give an exchange, which is also easy to understand. So he played first knight e2, now he wants to push h6. Rook c1, queen e4, takes, takes. We have here an interesting situation. Black is a pawn up, but white has better coordination. I like very much how, with limited number of pieces on the board, a white player managed to keep the dynamics and the initiative. Let's see. Knight g3. For people interested in theoretical evaluation of this position, f5 is probably black's best move. And then to try to analyze this kind of position, which is very sharp. Black damaged his pawn structure a bit with the move f5, but on the other hand, he got piece in play. And he's speeding up his development. And this is interesting. Move bishop b7, which was played in the game, may look more logical, but now white will play very well. Rook h4, f5. Black perhaps thought is the same, because here, if he played f5, stakes, rook h4, he will play move bishop b7. So he probably thought same thing. Well, it isn't actually, because this pawn is now hanging. Bishop c4 tempo. King e7. You have to go to e7, you cannot go to f7 because you're under pin. What is problem of king on e7? I mean, white plays very well this part of the game. Problem is that it takes a square from the knight to protect g6. So what is logical move for white? Knight e2, excellently played. He wants to get to f4. Bishop a6, trying to trade the bishops. Takes, takes. Knight f4 was certainly a possible move. However, small problem is that rook h7 is not forced. Knight e7 is interesting. White is exchanged up now, but okay, rook is stupid. And black is starting to get some squares. Black has very good chances to somehow keep the stuff together here. So white here does much more straightforward play. g4. He wants either to break black's structure, break everything, or he wants to take on f5 when you take back to get two fantastic passers. So g4 is a very good move. Very good move. Black decides to allow passers. Takes, takes, move king. Takes, takes, and push. We see now white is black first take on d4, knight c5. He gets square for knight and he wants to jump. Okay, knight f4. Knight e7. Well, black is a pawn up, but white has a better position because his one pawn is holding black's two, and those two pawns are a power. I think that up to this moment that white has played extremely well this game, showing that even without the queens on the board, you can play very energetically. Rook d1, not clear. Maybe rook h3 was a better move because rook on c1 is already developed. So why not rook h3? Okay, you cover b square, so you don't need to worry some jumps, though it doesn't happen immediately because you would have e6 and bishop b4. But rook h3, which is very sensible move, I think, and also I want rook g3 to target this weakness. I prefer move rook h3. White play move rook d1, rook h8, bishop b4. Rook he8. Okay, white calculated this. That's why he played move rook d1. That this doesn't work. And okay, pawns simply run. Run, baby, run. Done. So he played move rook e8. Now taking is not exactly the same because, okay, knight c6, and now you cannot push because if you push, I can sacrifice. And this is very messy position because this rook is stupid and I took some pawns. And I will have some blockade. So this pawn in itself will not kind of queen or anything like this. So White now correctly improves his rook, rook h3. Knight g8, a reasonable move. Black wants to be able to give something on e6. Now probably rook g3 was the best move. White did not like the following move. Rook g5, rook e5 takes, rook e7. But actually after rook g6, White has sizable advantage, even though he's a pawn down. Why? Because this knight on f4 is unbelievably strong, and this rook as well. For example, if rook f7. Now a very unpleasant move is rook a6, swinging to the other side and start to collect some material, and knight is extremely strong, pawn is dangerous. White did not play it most precise. He pushed e6. When you get to such a position, those two pawns are very powerful. When you push them, be careful how you push them. Be careful how you push them. So e6, king d6, rook g3, hitting on a weakness. Now a5 to hit on a bishop was a clever move. Why? Because after bishop c5 takes, rook takes, knight e7, black is building up a blockade, and given the fact that white pushed this pawn to e6 too early, king is now very safe. He takes knight 3 jumps to try to give him check, so this is not going to happen. And black is having trumps of his own. It is not like black is sitting duck. So this check on e6 was, what white gave was premature. Instead of this check on e6, it was better to improve rook, give this pawn on e5, in order to have extremely dominant rook accompanied with this knight, and then simply swing on the other side. In the game, black did not play move rook c7, a5. He played move rook c7, protecting a pawn. And here white made a very good move. I said knight is 3 jumps from giving a check. And this is exactly what white understands. Knight g2. He wants to give check on f5. Rook f8, knight e3. Or on c4. b5. Here white had to play move rook g6, and his whole strategy would be working. You cannot push f4 because of simple check. And check is a threat, by the way. And you cannot play move knight e7 because of rook g7, knight g4, and this king is in everlasting pin. But white, he made a mistake. He thought the game was completely over, and he played move rook c1. Now, what he wants to do is kind of obvious. He wants to eliminate some stuff on c5, and then he wants to take on g7, and he wants to queen his pawns. And in game, indeed, happened move f4, and everything went the way white hoped it to get. Takes. Beautiful move. You cannot take because there is bishop c5. Everything is now going the way white dreamed. Knight e7, another move, and white brilliantly won. What could black do here? Why was rook c1 a question mark? I give you a hint. If this rook cannot take on g7, cannot enter, then situation becomes different. Black had to sacrifice a pawn in order to close the file and play move g5. Here, sorry. Push g5. And after takes, now push f4. Now situation is very different. Now you don't have move rook g7 because your pawn stands in the way, so rook can never enter. Your stupid pawn stands in the way. And let's say g7, rook f6. By the way, white can also lose this. Now white needs to find the way not to lose. Push pawn. And now we can come to rather spectacular lines which end in a draw. Let's say king d7, because look, you cannot take with a rook. It is possible to take by knight and to enter some crazy variations, which should ultimately maybe end in a draw. Why? Because white is winning a piece, but black collected some pawns. But most probably king d7 is a nice move. And then we can come into drawing sequence. Let's say knight g4, take, check, take. Unbelievable pawn structure. Push, push. Now what to play? To take or not to take? Not to take, because taking is losing. And white collects. You cannot touch anything, because those two pawns, connected pawns. But e3, now bishop must get removed, and now it all ends peacefully and in draw. So black had a chance to save his game, but I like very much how white played, what we had in this game, how white did it. Let's say starting this position, that with very limited number of pieces he managed actually to keep his business going. Very limited number of pieces. And g4 actually very well played by white. Up to some certain moment, now a strong knight. And I think that this is another critical line for the people who would like to play this particular variation and to try to figure out what is going on here. And black again, I think if white does not want to protect this pawn on c2, black probably needs to take a challenge and to take it. And now, for example, move like f5 and try to figure out what is going on in this position. Though I still do not see anything particularly wrong, that's what Fischer did. So I think this is interesting material for people playing this Winawer with white or black. And in the final fourth game of this chapter, king defending on his own, we are going to see king defending on his own the king side, but in a different opening.